Diablo is undeniably a classic franchise. The original game was one of the pillars of the ARPG genre. It wasn't the first, but was certainly the most popular at the time and helped propel the genre into the mainstream. Then Diablo 2 came along and brought with it refined gameplay, more interesting loot, and a larger, more expansive world, and in doing so, the game saw even greater success. And while the most recent game, Diablo 3, launched with numerous issues, over the years it has corrected course and found itself to be the best-selling Diablo game of all time. But even with its rich history, the future of Diablo is uncertain, between the misguided and mishandled announcement of Diablo Immortal and the larger discussion about Blizzard as a company in general. I think for good reason, there's a lot of concern about whether or not the next Diablo game is going to be any good. But before we get into it, I want to take a moment to touch on what Diablo has meant to me personally over the years. And I'll tell you, to this day, I still remember my first introduction to the franchise. It was summertime 1997. 12-year-old me probably just inhaled a couple of Eggos, stuffed my bag with every magic card I owned, and biked over my friend's house for a day filled with playing cards, skateboarding badly, hacky sacks, and when the sun went down, junk food and video games. Each of my friends owned different consoles, but I had one in particular whose parents bought him a computer, and he's the one who introduced me to the wonderful world of PC gaming. And then that one fateful summer night, I was blessed with the opportunity to descend into the depths of hell. I remember his room dimly lit by the monitor displaying the Diablo main menu, the name engulfed in flames, and those spinning pentagrams that always seemed to kind of go awkwardly fast. But anyways, he looked at me and said, "Dude, you can play first." So I sat down, I hit enter, and away we went. Like many of you watching this, one of my first real solid memories of the world of Diablo is the Tristram music. The twang of that 12-string guitar as I made my way through town from one thatched roof hut to another, talking to each villager, including that drunk guy who I was pretty sure wasn't speaking English.
Can't a fellow drink in peace?
Then I found the cathedral and the wounded townsmen warning me of the dangers below. And the rest of that night is sort of like this dreamy haze.
The sanctity of this place has been fouled.
A mix of staff attacks, fireballs, enemies falling apart, with some notable highlights like when we first ran across the butcher.
Fresh meat.
As was tradition, we took turns playing, alternating on death, and fueled by ramen and bagel bites, made the steady descent through the cathedral, catacombs, caves, hell, and eventually to Diablo himself. By the time we were done, the sun was most definitely rising, and with the Lord of Terror freshly slain, we passed out to wake up around noon and begin the process all over again. This was the first of countless nights spent playing Diablo, and also began a lifelong interest in RPGs of every kind. Action, MMO, shooter, whatever. Games that have me playing for loot are to this day some of my favorite. Now you might be asking yourself, Force, who gives a shit? First off, don't be so rude. And secondly, I kind of just wanted to share this story to set the stage for my love of Diablo. And I'm sure a lot of you have similar memories, whether it's this game or any other from your childhood. I think the interesting thing about moments like this is we don't pick them. I didn't know at the time that Diablo was going to be one of the pillars of my childhood, but it was. And like many other Blizzard games, it absolutely helped to shape my love for gaming. A few years later, I was entering high school and managed to convince my parents to buy me a laptop for doing homework, and then Diablo 2 launched, and I have similar great memories with that game. Many sleepless nights adventuring with my friends, exploring the world, fighting enemies, collecting loot, and getting obliterated in PvP, or taken advantage of by some trade scam. I loved all of it. So much so, in fact, that I wrote a few stories for my high school English class about the adventures of my paladin. Wasn't the biggest hit with the classmates. Fast forward to 2012, I'd been making YouTube videos for 2 years, Diablo 3 was about to launch, and I decided to start covering the game. I made a podcast with a few friends, was pumping out videos for every little update, and overall was just hyped to play. And then Diablo 3 launched and was a total disaster. Between their decision to make the game online only, which resulted in many people's inability to play for several days, to the implementation of the real money auction house, which initially I honestly thought thought was a cool idea. This notion that we could earn money playing the game, selling items that we found. What I failed to realize at that time was what this meant for the game's natural loot acquisition. Rather than just being a cool way for gamers to potentially earn some cash, it ended up creating this ecosystem where you felt cheated by the normal drop rates, and that in not spending real money, you were falling behind other players. On top of that, Blizzard took a cut out of every sale, which didn't go over too well with fans. I ended up falling off Diablo 3 a lot quicker than I expected, especially since I had started making tons of YouTube videos like a year prior to the game launching. In fact, I think I quit the game after just a few weeks. But over time, things changed. They removed the real money auction house, got an expansion and several content patches that added new gameplay and quality of life features, and now, in 2020, I can say that the game's in a pretty good spot. Even though Diablo 3 never had as big of an impact on me as the first two, I've played a fair bit of the game over these years, jumping in for the start of a new season, to level up a character, play around with different builds, and it's been entertaining enough and has kept me coming back. Now that said, the game's been stagnant for some time now. After Reaper of Souls came out in 2014, fans were expecting a second expansion. But as the years went by with no news or announcement, hope dwindled and was eventually smothered when it was revealed that there would be no follow-up to Reaper of Souls. Instead, they were focusing on the next Diablo game. Ah yes, everyone exclaimed, they must be talking about Diablo 4. How ignorant we were at the time. In August 2018, Blizzard teased that they were working on several new Diablo projects.
We'd also like to let you know that the forges here at Blizzard are burning hot, and we have multiple Diablo projects in the works. Some of them are going to take longer than others, but we may have some things to show you later this year.
Now, since this was happening just a few months before BlizzCon, everyone assumed we would be getting news of Diablo 4. But what we got instead will forever go down as one of Blizzard's biggest blunders ever.
We love Diablo. We want to use mobile devices as the platform for a new Diablo game.
I'm not a huge fan of mobile games. I think that by and large, they are an inferior gaming experience, but I also realize that there's a massive market and there are tons of people all over the world who do enjoy playing games on their phones. So for that reason, I'm not surprised that Blizzard is looking to make more mobile games. But that wasn't the issue. The issue with the Diablo Immortal announcement was one of time and place. It came at a time when people were highly anticipating Diablo 4, and it happened at a place, BlizzCon, that is filled with the most hardcore fans of Blizzard games, which are predominantly PC focused. And to make matters worse, when they got the fairly negative reaction to the announcement of Diablo Immortal, they doubled down with comments like this.
We don't have any plans at the moment to do PC. Do you guys not have phones?
Yeah, you guys all have
Everyone's got a
phones,
phone.
right?
You can play on your tablet too.
Yes, Blizzard, we all have phones, but everyone who paid the hundreds or thousands of dollars to travel to and attend your event has been playing your game for the past 25 years on PC. Most of your fans like PC games. And surprisingly, they were surprised by the reactions they got. The response to the response that they weren't expecting was them assuring fans that other Diablo projects that were not on phones are in fact still in the works, which finally brings us to Diablo 4. The following year at BlizzCon 2019, we finally got the announcement of Diablo 4, and it was grim, dark, and seemed to be exactly what fans wanted.
4, 3.
So what do we know about Diablo 4? Well, quite a lot actually. At the BlizzCon announcement, we had a great outline of the game's various systems and mechanics, and we also got to see a decent chunk of gameplay. In fact, I played the game myself quite a lot. So let's go over everything that we do know about Diablo 4. The game's story is taking place decades after Diablo 3, Sanctuary is in shambles, and Lilith, the mother of humanity, has been summoned. Why is she here? What does it mean? let's just assume it's probably not a good thing. Now, traditionally, the Diablo games have been described as action RPGs, which makes this next part pretty interesting. Diablo 4 is being called an open-world action RPG with a non-linear campaign. So what's the difference? Well, the game features one massive world with 5 distinct regions that can be seamlessly explored, meaning you can walk from the top of the map all the way down to the bottom with no loading screens, and the game's story, being non-linear, will be breaking away from the series' traditional act structure. You'll still be able to teleport around the map via waypoints, but the game will also include a brand new mount system. Players will get access to mounts that can cut down on travel time, have customization through armor, pieces, and saddles, as well as hanging trophies, and give access to these unique dismounting abilities. The open world will include much of what you expect from Diablo and RPG games in general. There are dungeons, world events, and bosses. The dungeons and campaign missions will be instanced to you and your party, but the rest of the world and the towns that act as social hubs will be a shared space. So as you walk around a world event or boss, you will probably come across other players. And if you're feeling in the competitive mood, the game will also have PvP zones, which will likely offer some sort of incentive to get players to fight, other than the thrill of victory. And the game will have hundreds of randomly generated dungeons, each with their own dungeon-specific events and objectives. There's also going to be endgame variations of the dungeons through this key system that can add difficulty ranks and affixes to give players more varied content with strategic depth, and much like the open world, they said there will be no loading screens between dungeon levels for a more seamless exploration experience. Enemy faction families will be returning, with things like the Fallen, Skeletons, and these drowned enemies have been revealed. The different enemy types working together, like you'll have swarmers running up to surround a player, and then strong enemies in the front, and ranged and caster enemies in the back. Elites with strong affixes return, and of course, there will be bosses. They've also added this brand new stagger system, letting players use crowd control abilities on a boss, and if you do this enough, it will fill up a bar. They then become staggered, which will change the boss's phase and add some new fighting mechanics. And then of course, we've got the classes. They said there will be 5 playable at launch, with the Sorceress, Barbarian, and Druid revealed so far. And like the console versions of Diablo 3, all classes in Diablo 4 will be getting a special dash ability. There's also going to be finally some character customization visually speaking, like you can change things like the hair, eyes, skin color, and more. They said that power progression in this game is going to be all about player choice. You've got skill points you unlock and a talent tree to progress through, customizing your playstyle, with the strongest and most powerful talents being at the bottom of each tree. And of course, what would a loot game be without the loot? Diablo 4 will have 6 item rarities from normal to mythic, with the higher rarity items including more affixes. Item sets are back, but the focus is going to be on legendaries this time, with hundreds of them in the game to help offer players more build variety. Runes are also going to be returning, as players can combine one condition rune and one effect rune to form a rune word. And while Blizzard is still fiddling around with the specifics of itemization, there is of course a vocal Diablo community that has plenty of suggestions themselves. So that's more or less what we know about Diablo 4. Sounds pretty good, right? And yeah, it is good. Last BlizzCon, I got several hours of hands-on time with the game. I played each class, explored the world and dungeons, checked out public events, and tried my hand at a world boss. And like most everything Blizzard puts out, it was fun. And in fact, it was even pretty well put together for such an early build of the game. Now, there are a lot of people who are still really worried about Diablo 4. One of the biggest complaints being that Blizzard isn't the same company that it once was, and you can no longer trust them to make a good game. And I agree that Blizzard has changed. Their games don't quite have the same spunk that they used to. Like, I would describe Blizzard's older titles as polished but with sharp edges. And nowadays, everything's a little softer, a little more homogenous, and is a little more friendly to a mass audience. But I do disagree with this idea that they don't still make great games. Besides that one massive exception, which was their recent botched attempt to remake Warcraft 3, everything else that they've put out over these past 15 years, I have genuinely enjoyed. Overwatch, Heroes of the Storm, Hearthstone, Diablo 3, StarCraft 2, and the various World of Warcraft expansions are all games that I sunk hundreds to thousands of hours into. Now, there is a separate conversation to be had about whether or not you're okay with giving Blizzard your money, and I absolutely would not suggest going to them, or any corporation for that matter, for any moral guidance. In fact, if you kind of want to see a deep dive into some of the failings of Blizzard as a company in recent years, I suggest checking out this pretty awesome recent video from the Act Man. But if we're strictly talking about whether or not they make good, fun games, I would say yes. I have had fun with nearly every single Blizzard game, and I would expect Diablo 4 to be no different. Now that said, Blizzard isn't the same company it used to be. And in much the same way, yeah, Diablo itself isn't the same franchise it once was. To me, the games used to feel like this big adventure, like I was going on this exciting expedition. And now it just kind of feels like I'm indulging in my lizard brain's pleasure response systems by repeating the same activities over and over and over and over again to get that sweet dopamine hit, motivating me to do it for a little while longer. How much of that is the game's fault? How much is me being 35, having played hundreds if not thousands of games, and making novel experiences that much harder to come by? I don't know. What I do know though is that I still love games, and maybe despite my better interest, I still love Blizzard games. Blizzard is different, Diablo is different, I'm different, but I'm also hopeful. I hope that Blizzard can turn things around. I hope that they can steer the ship of their reputation in a better direction. And I really hope they can pull things together and make Diablo 4 a great gameplay experience. What's gonna happen? It's too early to tell, but yeah, I'm hopeful. My name has been Force. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you next time.